Welcome to the History Maps podcast. We are doing a deep dive into the source material covering the Rashidun Caliphate.
Right, which is an exploration of the 29-year period from 632 to 661.
Yeah, and it is a period that permanently rewired the political, linguistic, and religious map of the globe.
It really did.
So the core objective today is to map out exactly how a fractured, primarily nomadic tribal society located in the unforgiving environment of the Arabian Peninsula
Managed to transition into a centralized intercontinental empire in just under 3 decades.
Exactly. I mean, we're going to examine the specific military doctrines they developed, the creation from scratch of a vast imperial bureaucracy, and, the internal political civil wars that nearly tore the project apart.
Not to mention the lasting religious schisms that defined the reigns of the first 4 caliphs, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali.
Right.
Because the time frame we are examining here, it represents a period of extreme, almost volatile transformation.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, this is an era where the foundational structures of Islamic governance, fiscal policy, and military strategy were forged under immense, unrelenting pressure.
Yeah.
Every decision made by these early leaders had immediate life or death consequences for their burgeoning state.
And long-term consequences that are still visible in the modern geopolitical landscape, right?
Very much so.
For you listening at home, just consider the sheer speed and scale of this historical pivot. We are looking at a localized organization that scaled into a global superpower almost overnight.
Yeah, and they did this without modern communication.
Right, without modern logistics and without an existing imperial
Ethical and political anomaly.
It is. And to understand the mechanics of how this actually happened, we have to start at the epicenter of a massive constitutional crisis.
Well, it is the defining crisis of any new movement, really, the moment the founder is no longer there to hold it together.
Yeah. Let us establish the scene. It is Medina. The date is June 8th, 632. The Prophet Muhammad has just died after a brief illness. He is resting in the house of his wife, Aisha.
And the sources describe an immediate visceral reaction in the streets of Medina.
Yeah, it is not just sadness. It is a profound structural panic.
Exactly. The community is entirely unmoored because Muhammad left no explicit, universally agreed upon written instruction regarding who should succeed him as the political leader of the nascent Islamic State.
I mean, he was the religious leader, the chief diplomat, the military commander, and the absolute supreme judge.
And suddenly he is gone.
Right.
Which creates an immediate and severe leadership vacuum.
Right. And to grasp the danger of this moment, we have to analyze the social fabric of the Arabian Peninsula at this time.
Yeah, it was deeply intrinsically tribal. The political entity that existed in Medina was essentially held together by the personal charisma, the recognized religious authority, and the highly specific diplomatic treaties forged by one man.
So he had negotiated a complex web of alliances with various Bedouin tribes across the peninsula.
Exactly. And once he passes, the immediate legal and political question for all of those tribes is whether this alliance is a permanent state entity.
Or just a temporary treaty bound to the life of the man who signed it.
Precisely.
Now, the sources indicate that literally hours after his death, while his body is still being prepared for burial, a group known as the Ansar urgently convene at a place called the Saqifa courtyard.
Right.
And the Ansar are the Medinan helpers, right? The local inhabitants who originally took Muhammad and his followers in when they fled persecution in Mecca.
Yeah, they are the locals.
So they are moving to elect one of their own, a man named Sa'd ibn Ubadah, as the new leader. But why are they rushing to do this in the middle of a funeral?
Well, the rush is driven by a very pragmatic fear. The Ansar were terrified of being dominated by the Muhajirun.
The emigrants.
Right, the early Muslims who fled Mecca with Muhammad. More importantly, the Muhajirun were members of the Quraysh tribe.
Ah, which was Muhammad's own tribe.
Exactly, and the traditional aristocratic elite of the region. So the Ansar felt they had hosted the community, shed their own blood to defend it during the early wars, and now, with the Prophet gone.
They worried the Quraysh elites would assert complete control.
Yeah, and push the native Medinans to the margins of the very state they helped build. So they convened at the Saqifa to preemptively select a leader to protect their political and social status.
But they do not manage to do this in secret.
No, they do not.
3 highly prominent members of the Muhajirun, Abu Bakr, Umar ibn al-Khattab, and Abu Ubaidah, hear about this gathering at the courtyard and immediately intervene.
And the sources describe this not as a polite discussion, but as a very tense, highly charged debate over the future of the community.
It was arguably the most critical juncture in early Islamic history.
Definitely. I mean, Abu Bakr steps into this courtyard and essentially delivers a masterclass in political pragmatism.
Yeah, he acknowledges the immense contributions of the Ansar, but he argues that the broader Arabian tribes outside of Medina would simply never accept political leadership from anyone other than the Quraysh.
Because the Quraysh had the historical prestige, the lineage, and the established authority across the peninsula.
Right, so Abu Bakr uses a combination of cold political reality and references to tribal hierarchy to argue that the caliph, a word meaning successor or deputy, must come from the prophet's tribe in order to maintain the fragile unity of the entire peninsula.
Because if an Ansar leader were chosen, the peripheral tribes would immediately secede.
And the debate in the courtyard reaches a climax when Umar, recognizing the need for immediate decisive action to prevent a fracture, suddenly takes Abu Bakr's hand and pledges formal allegiance to him.
Yeah, and the rest of the men in the courtyard, caught in the momentum of the moment and recognizing the logic of the argument, follow suit.
Which effectively cements Abu Bakr as the first caliph. However, the sources point out a very notable absence at this impromptu election.
Yes.
Ali ibn Abi Talib.
Right, Ali is Muhammad's cousin and his son-in-law, having married his daughter Fatima.
So why wasn't he there?
Well, Ali is physically absent from the Saqifa courtyard because he, along with other members of the Prophet's immediate family, the Banu Hashim, are fulfilling their familial duty.
Oh, they are washing and preparing the prophet's body for the funeral rites.
Exactly. They are entirely removed from the political maneuvering happening across town.
And this absence is the seed of a major historical divergence. Now, we need to state clearly that our goal here is to impartially report on the two distinct historical perspectives found in the source texts regarding this event.
Right. We're not endorsing either side.
Exactly. We're just examining how these texts interpret the events of June 8th, 632.
Because the events at the Saqifa formed the foundational split in Islamic historiography. You have the Sunni perspective, which views the Saqifa meeting as a necessary, pragmatic exercise of consensus known as shura.
Shura.
Yeah. From this viewpoint, the quick, decisive election of Abu Bakr was vital. The state was in imminent danger of collapse, and Abu Bakr was the senior, most respected companion who could hold it together.
So it was a legitimate political process designed to prevent the immediate splintering of the community into warring tribal factions.
Correct.
And then the sources detail the Shia perspective, which interprets the same events very differently.
Right. The Shia historical view argues that Ali was intentionally politically sidelined while he was occupied with mourning and family duties.
And this perspective points to an earlier event, right? Something that occurred at a place called Ghadir Khumm.
Yes, according to the texts, during a journey, Muhammad stopped and declared to the gathered followers, "For whoever I am his Mawla, Ali is his Mawla."
And the Arabic term mala is highly complex from what I understand.
Extremely complex. But Shia traditions interpret this specific usage as a clear divine designation of Ali as the rightful political and spiritual successor.
So from that viewpoint, the hasty election at the Saqifa was an illegitimate bypass of the prophet's explicitly intended heir.
Exactly.
To put the mechanics of this into perspective for you listening, the Saqifa meeting functions like an emergency constitutional convention happening in real time, literally hours after a state founder's death.
Yeah.
There is no clear written constitution, there are multiple armed factions with deep-seated insecurities, and the sheer panic of the situation forces a rapid decision that will have ramifications for millennia.
Well said. And what the historical record shows is that Ali does ultimately pledge allegiance to Abu Bakr, though the sources differ on the exact timing.
Yeah, some cite a delay of up to 6 months.
Right. But the consensus in the texts is that he does this specifically to maintain communal unity and avoid a catastrophic internal civil war, a concept known as fitna.
Fitna, right. But this immediate political crisis within the city walls of Medina is almost instantly overshadowed by a much larger existential threat materializing across the entire Arabian Peninsula.
Yeah, because while the inner circle in Medina is debating the nuances of leadership and succession, the vast majority of the Bedouin tribes across the peninsula are looking at the news of Muhammad's death and declaring their contracts canceled.
Which brings us to the period known as the Ridda Wars, or the Wars of Apostasy, spanning roughly from 632 to 634.
Right.
Abu Bakr has just secured his position as caliph, and his brief reign is immediately plunged into a violently intense struggle for survival.
Because the Ridda Wars represent a massive, coordinated, peninsula-wide rebellion. As we discussed regarding the tribal mindset, many of these peripheral tribes had submitted to Medina politically and religiously, but they viewed their submission as a strictly personal pact with Muhammad himself.
So with his death, they felt no continuing obligation to his successor, Abu Bakr.
Exactly. And the most immediate manifestation of this rebellion was their explicit refusal to pay the zakat.
The zakat is the obligatory alms tax, right? One of the core pillars of the faith.
Yes, but functionally, it was the tax revenue that funded the state in Medina.
Wait, but the sources mention that this wasn't just a simple tax revolt. Several tribes actively rallied behind new self-proclaimed prophets.
Yeah, that is a significant detail. We have historical figures emerging, like Tulaiha, a woman named Saja, and most prominently, a man named Musaylima.
Right. These individuals are rising up, claiming they're receiving their own divine revelations and challenging Medina's central authority entirely.
So Abu Bakr is faced with a dual-pronged existential threat. A complete fiscal rebellion that will bankrupt the state, and an ideological rebellion that threatens to fragment the religious cohesion of the peninsula.
And his response is swift and entirely uncompromising, isn't it?
Absolutely. He declares that withholding the zakat is not a political dispute. It is equivalent to apostasy from the religion itself.
He refuses to negotiate terms or lower the tax burden.
Right. He famously states to his advisors that he would fight the tribes even if they withheld a single hobbling cord for a camel that they used to pay to the prophet.
So we have to look at the mechanics of this. Were these tribes actually throwing away the religion entirely, reverting to their pre-Islamic practices? Or were they just looking at Medina and saying, we're not paying tribute to a distant central government anymore?
In the context of 7th century Arabia, the distinction between religious duty and state obligation really did not exist. The zakat was a religious pillar, but it was the sole fiscal engine of the nascent state.
So if Abu Bakr had allowed tribes to opt out of the tax while remaining nominally part of the community?
The central treasury in Medina would have dried up instantly. He would not have been able to provision an army, support the poor, or maintain any administrative control.
Without tax revenue, the political entity of Medina simply ceases to exist.
Exactly. Enforcing the zakat was as much about the physical survival of the state apparatus as it was about religious orthodoxy.
And Abu Bakr's military strategy for handling this is highly systematic. The sources say he divides the loyalist forces into 11 separate army corps. Each corps is given a specific geographic objective to systematically retake the peninsula tribe by tribe. And this is the moment in the historical record where we really see the emergence of Khalid ibn al-Walid as a premier military commander.
Oh, definitely. Khalid ibn al-Walid becomes the primary instrument of Abu Bakr's uncompromising policy. He is given command of the largest and most mobile force, tasked with confronting the most dangerous rebel factions.
And the climax of this entire pacification campaign is the Battle of Yamama, which takes place in December 632.
Right.
The scale of this battle is completely different from the earlier skirmishes in Islamic history. Khalid's forces march against Musaylima, who has managed to form a massive coalition of around 40,000 fighters from the Banu Hanifa tribe and their allies.
Yeah, Musaylima had even offered to split the peninsula with Medina, which Abu Bakr rejected out of hand.
The ensuing battle is described in the sources as an absolute meat grinder. It takes place in an enclosed agricultural area known as the Garden of Death.
Very descriptive name.
Yeah. Khalid ultimately wins, and Musaylima is killed, but the cost to the Medinan forces is staggering. The texts record that 1,200 Muslims died in this single engagement.
And we must focus on who exactly constituted those 1,200 casualties, because among the dead were numerous individuals known as hufaz.
We should define that term based on the texts for the listener.
Right. A hafiz, the singular of hufaz, is a person who has memorized the entire text of the Quran by heart.
Because at this specific point in history, the Quran was still largely an oral tradition.
Exactly. While there were scattered written fragments on parchment, bone, and stone, the primary method of preservation was human memory.
So the sheer volume of Hafaz killed at the Battle of Yamama created a severe panic in the leadership in Medina.
Yeah, Umar approached Abu Bakr and argued that if they continued to lose these memorizers in battle, portions of the scripture could be lost forever.
Which means this military casualty rate directly leads to a massive administrative undertaking.
It does. Abu Bakr, acting on Umar's urgent advice, officially commissions the compilation of the Quran into a single physical manuscript.
They realized that relying on the memories of mortal men who were actively fighting in brutal civil wars was no longer a viable strategy for preserving the foundational text of their society.
Precisely. The Ridda Wars, therefore, serve as a crucible. By early 633, the wars conclude.
The Arabian Peninsula is violently reunified, heavily centralized under Medina's authority, and the army has been hardened by relentless combat.
Yeah, and Abu Bakr takes this newly forged, highly disciplined military machine and makes a monumental strategic decision. He points it outward, beyond the borders of the peninsula.
He directs this unified force toward the two towering superpowers of late antiquity, the Byzantine Empire to the north and west, and the Sasanian Persian Empire to the north and east.
Right.
Abu Bakr initiates this, but he dies of illness in August 634.
Yes.
Before his death, he unequivocally nominates Umar as his successor, avoiding the chaos of the Saqifa.
A very smooth transition.
Exactly. So we are now entering Umar's reign, which spans from 634 to 644. This decade represents a period of conquest that completely defies logistical logic.
It really does.
But to understand the mechanics of how this happened, we must set the geopolitical stage. I mean, why were the Byzantines and the Sasanians so vulnerable to an army emerging from the desert?
The timing is the most crucial factor here. The Byzantine Empire, ruled by Heraclius, and the Sasanian Empire, ruled by Khosrow II, had just concluded a devastating 26-year-long total war against each other.
From 602 to 628.
Exactly. It was essentially a world war for late antiquity. The Sasanians had marched all the way to the walls of Constantinople, and the Byzantines had marched into the heart of Persia.
So by the time they signed a peace treaty, both empires were fundamentally hollowed out.
Yeah, their treasuries were empty, their standing armies were decimated, and their infrastructure was in ruins.
The sources also detail the impact of disease, right?
Oh yes. The plague of Shiro had swept through the Sasanian Empire, killing a massive percentage of the population, including the king himself.
Leading to a period where they had something like a dozen rulers in 4 years.
Right. And the Byzantines were heavily taxed and facing deep religious divisions between different Christian sects in Syria and Egypt.
They were towering ancient giants, but they were bleeding, exhausted, and internally fractured.
And into this geopolitical vacuum marches the Rashidun army.
Let's analyze the Byzantine front first. The decisive engagement here is the Battle of Yarmouk, which occurs in August 636.
Right.
Our sources indicate a Muslim army of roughly 20 to 40,000 troops is facing a Byzantine imperial force that could have numbered up to 100,000 men, commanded by a general named Vahan.
Now, the Battle of Yarmouk is a masterclass in exploiting terrain and environmental conditions. The battle lasted for 6 grueling days.
6 days.
Yeah. Khalid ibn al-Walid, operating under the overall command of Abu Ubaidah, chose the battlefield meticulously. It was a plain bordered by steep ravines and the Yarmouk River.
So Khalid utilized the harsh terrain to negate the numerical superiority of the Byzantines.
Exactly.
The texts also describe specific tactical maneuvers. The Muslim forces actively utilized the local weather phenomena, timing their major assaults with sudden, blinding dust storms that blew directly into the faces of the Byzantine formations.
Right, which masked the movements of the Arab cavalry.
And Khalid continually struck the Byzantine flanks, forcing them to contract their lines. Over the 6 days, he systematically cut off their avenues of retreat.
So when the Byzantine army finally broke under the pressure and the environmental conditions, they found themselves trapped against the sheer ravines.
The retreat turned into a catastrophic rout, effectively annihilating the Byzantine field army in the Levant.
And almost simultaneously on the Sasanian front in the east, we see a similar collapse at the Battle of Al-Qadisiyah in November 636.
Right. Umar dispatches an army led by Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, numbering about 30,000 men. They march into Iraq to face the primary Sasanian army commanded by Rastam Farrakhzad.
This is a massive 3-day battle on the plains, and the Sasanians deploy war elephants, which initially terrorize the Arab cavalry as the horses just refuse to approach them.
But the sources detail how the Arab infantry adapted. They began specifically targeting the elephants, shooting the riders, and cutting the girths holding the howdahs.
Yeah, eventually causing the beasts to panic and trample their own lines.
And again, environmental factors are cited. On the 3rd day, a severe sandstorm blows in, disrupting the Sasanian lines. Rastam is killed in the chaos. The Persian army shatters.
Which opens the door to the Sasanian heartland. And by 637, the Sasanian capital of Ctesiphon falls to the Arab armies.
Then we look at the expansion into Egypt. Between 639 and 642, a commander named Amr ibn al-As convinces Umar to let him enter Egypt.
Yeah.
He does this with a highly mobile, relatively tiny force of between 4,000 and 15,000 men.
And he manages to capture the massive Babylon fortress and eventually forces the surrender of Alexandria.
In doing so, he strips the Byzantine Empire of its absolute wealthiest grain-producing province.
So we must analyze the military mechanics here. We have to ask how these relatively small armies consistently defeated larger, heavily entrenched imperial forces.
Right.
It comes down to the fundamental structure and doctrine of the Rashidun army. They did not rely on the heavy cataphracts, the heavily armored cavalry or the massive logistical baggage trains that the Byzantines and Persians used.
The core of the Arab military was highly mobile light infantry, transported across long distances by camels, and elite, fast-moving light cavalry.
Right.
Let us expand on the mechanics of this, because it is vital to understanding their success. Think of the Arab armies as a fleet of highly maneuverable, fast-moving speedboats.
Okay, I like that analogy.
They are operating in the desert, running circles around these massive, heavily armored Byzantine and Persian dreadnoughts.
Yeah.
The dreadnoughts, the imperial armies, have immense striking power, but they were tied to massive supply lines, slow-moving wagons, and paved roads. They simply cannot pivot quickly enough to respond to the speedboats hitting their flanks.
And the analogy holds up perfectly when you consider the function of the camel. The camel allowed the Arab armies to treat the deep desert as a navigable ocean.
While the Byzantine and Sasanian armies viewed the deep desert as an impassable barrier, a wall.
Exactly. The Arab armies viewed it as a highway. They could strike a city, retreat into the arid desert where heavy imperial cavalry could not follow due to a lack of water, and reposition for another attack hundreds of miles away faster than the empires could send written orders to coordinated defense.
But conquering territory rapidly is only one half of the equation. Governing millions of new, diverse subjects across different continents is entirely another challenge.
Yeah.
You cannot run an intercontinental empire using the administrative structure of a raiding party.
No, you cannot.
Which brings us to the internal mechanisms of Umar's statecraft, which the sources suggest is his most enduring legacy.
This is the critical administrative pivot. Let us look at a specific narrative vignette that captures Umar's pragmatic approach to governance. In 638, Umar travels from Medina to Jerusalem to accept the city's surrender personally from the Christian patriarch, Sophronius.
And the texts detail the resulting agreement, known as the Pact of Umar.
Right. The Pact of Umar establishes the template for how the newly conquered populations will be managed. It is a highly pragmatic, contractual agreement.
It guarantees the Christian and Jewish inhabitants their physical safety, the protection of their property, and the explicit right to maintain their churches, synagogues, and places of worship.
And in exchange for this protection, the non-Muslim populations, designated legally as dhimmis, are required to pay a specific poll tax known as the jizya.
Right.
And they accept a subordinate political and military status within the empire. They are exempt from military service, but they must fund the state.
And this administrative pragmatism is not limited to Jerusalem. Umar realizes he has to build a massive state apparatus from scratch to handle the influx of wealth and territory. He creates two vital institutions: the Diwan, which is a central registry or ledger system, and the Beit al-Mal, the central public treasury.
The institution of the Diwan is revolutionary for this specific society. Previously, in Arabian warfare, warriors fought for immediate, tangible spoils of war, known as ghanima livestock, weapons, gold.
But Umar recognizes that allowing his armies to plunder newly conquered, highly complex agricultural powerhouses like the Tigris-Euphrates Basin in Iraq or the Nile Delta in Egypt would destroy the very economies he needs to tax.
Exactly. If soldiers kill the farmers and loot the grain silos, the long-term revenue stream dies. So he institutes a system of regular stipends called ata, paid directly from the central treasury.
The soldiers are essentially put on a state payroll.
Yes.
And the methodology behind the pay scale is highly indicative of their social values at the time. It is heavily stratified based on precedents in Islam.
The sources state that the earliest converts, the veterans of the very first battles alongside the Prophet, received massive stipends, up to 5,000 dirhams a year.
Meanwhile, later converts, or tribes that joined during the Ridda Wars, might get 200 dirhams.
Which creates a professionalized standing army. Their financial well-being and loyalty are suddenly tied directly to the central treasury in Medina and the person of the caliph, rather than to their local tribal chiefs or the individual generals leading them in the field.
It centralizes military power.
It does.
We also need to examine the taxation system that funded this treasury. It is meticulously stratified. Muslims pay the zakat, the alms tax, and a trade tax called the ushr.
Right.
Non-Muslims pay the jizya, the poll tax we mentioned, and heavily the kharaj, which is a land tax based on the agricultural productivity of their property.
This raises a massive logistical and administrative challenge, though. I mean,
Right.
how does a society composed largely of former pastoral nomads assess and collect agricultural yields across the vast, complex irrigation networks of the Nile and Mesopotamia?
They do not have the native expertise.
No, they don't. And this is where Umar's administrative genius, his pragmatism, shines. He explicitly forbids Arab soldiers from settling on the agricultural lands or becoming landowners.
Instead, he retains the existing highly trained Byzantine and Sasanian bureaucrats.
Exactly. The Arab conquerors essentially skimmed the very top layer of political and military leadership off the Roman and Persian provinces, but left the entire administrative machinery intact.
They kept Greek, Coptic, and Persian as the languages of the ledgers.
Yeah.
They kept the local landowners and tax collectors in place to make sure the farms kept running, the canals are maintained, and the taxes kept flowing into the new Beit Amal.
Precisely. Umar also establishes an independent judicial system. He appoints specific qadis, or judges, to separate the judiciary from the executive power of the provincial governors.
Which was a deliberate attempt to limit corruption and ensure the law was administered fairly across the vast new territories.
And the texts even detail a social welfare policy, the wealth pouring into the treasury-funded public works, like digging new canals in Egypt for famine relief in Arabia.
It provided support stipends for orphans, widows, and the disabled, reportedly regardless of their faith.
Right. But to maintain the military edge, Umar institutes a strict segregation policy.
Oh, to prevent the Arab armies from assimilating into the local cultures.
Exactly. To stop them intermarrying and becoming soft, sedentary landlords, he housed them in entirely new, isolated garrison cities known as Amsar.
These garrison cities, such as Kufa and Basra in Iraq and Fustat in Egypt, were essentially massive military encampments that grew into cities.
Yeah, they kept the military demographically segregated, maintaining their tribal cohesion, their Arabic language, and their martial readiness, while intentionally isolating them from the conquered populaces they were ruling over.
So we have to pause and analyze this. This entire structure sounds incredibly sophisticated for a society that was largely nomadic just a decade prior.
It is.
Did Umar just sit in Medina, look at a map, and invent a complex imperial bureaucracy out of whole cloth? Or was this a necessary, rapid adaptation of the imperial systems they had literally just physically absorbed?
It is deeply and fundamentally adaptive. The genius of Umar's administration was not invention, it was integration.
Right.
He looked at the existing Sasanian land tax system, the kharaj, and the Byzantine poll tax system, and he successfully mapped Islamic principles onto them to make them religiously acceptable.
So the concept of the diwan itself is a Persian administrative tool.
Yeah, he recognized what mechanisms worked for managing large populations and utilized them to stabilize a massive sudden influx of territory and wealth.
But Umar's highly effective reign comes to an abrupt end. In November 644, he is assassinated while leading prayers in the mosque in Medina.
Yes.
The assassin is a Persian captive named Abu Lulu'a Firuz, who was reportedly harboring a personal grievance over taxation.
Right.
Umar's sudden death leaves the empire structurally sound, borders expanding, and holding immense, unprecedented wealth. And as the historical record shows us repeatedly across all civilizations, extreme, rapid wealth breeds extreme political tension.
That transitions the narrative perfectly to the reign of the third caliph, Uthman ibn Affan, who rules from 644 to 656.
Before his death, Umar established a 6-member committee, a shura council, of the most prominent remaining companions to select the next leader.
And they select Uthman.
Uthman's era is characterized by massive economic prosperity and further territorial expansion, but also by deeply rooted, growing internal unrest.
Yeah, he expands the military horizons in ways Umar refused to. For instance, Uthman completely reverses Umar's strict ban on naval warfare.
Because Umar deeply distrusted the sea,
Right.
believing it was too risky and unpredictable for his desert-oriented armies.
Exactly. But Uthman listens to the strategic arguments of Muawiyah, his powerful governor in Syria.
Muawiyah argues that to truly challenge the Byzantine Empire and protect their coastal holdings, they must have a fleet.
So, with Uthman's authorization, they recruit skilled Coptic shipwrights in Egypt and Syrian sailors to build the first Islamic navy from scratch.
And this strategic pivot pays off rapidly. They launch naval expeditions and conquer the island of Cyprus in 649.
Yeah, and then we see a massive engagement at the Battle of the Masts in November 655. The new Arab fleet goes head-to-head with the primary Byzantine navy, commanded personally by the Byzantine Emperor Constans II, off the coast of Lycia.
The Battle of the Masts is historically significant because it completely shatters Byzantine naval absolute supremacy in the Eastern Mediterranean.
It does, and the text described the Muslim fleet utilizing highly unconventional tactics.
Yeah, they used grappling hooks to physically lock their ships onto the Byzantine vessels.
Right, effectively turning a naval battle into a massive, brutal infantry melee on the wooden decks.
Which negated the Byzantine superiority in seamanship and favored the close-quarters combat style of the Arab troops.
Domestically, Uthman undertakes a monumental cultural and religious task. Between the year 650 and 652, he initiates the final, definitive standardization of the Quran.
Because the rapid geographic expansion meant that non-Arab converts in places like Persia and the Levant were learning the Quran, and soldiers from different regions of Arabia were reciting the oral traditions with varying regional dialects.
Exactly. Uthman begins receiving alarming reports from generals on the frontiers in Armenia and Azerbaijan of serious disputes, even near violence among the troops, over the correct pronunciation and reading of the scripture.
So he commissions Zayd ibn Thabit, who had worked on Abu Bakr's earlier compilation, to produce a definitive standardized text written exclusively in the Qurayshi dialect.
And then Uthman does something politically drastic. He sends copies of this newly standardized mushaf to all the major provincial capitals, Damascus, Basra, Kufa, Mecca, and orders all other variant personal copies of the Quran to be burned or destroyed.
It was viewed as a necessary administrative move to ensure long-term religious unity, but it was highly controversial at the time.
Very much so. It centralized religious authority heavily in Medina and violently erased regional variations that some communities and prominent companions cherished and believed were equally valid.
But the real structural controversy of Uthman's reign is entirely political and economic. The sources highlight a growing visceral discontent regarding his administrative appointments.
Right. Uthman begins systematically replacing Umar's strict, austere provincial governors with his own relatives from his clan, the Banu Umayyad.
We see Muawiyah firmly entrenched with vast powers in Syria, and figures like his half-brother Walid ibn Uqba appointed to govern the volatile garrison city of Kufa.
And the Banu Umayyad were the traditional, aristocratic, wealthy elite of pre-Islamic Mecca.
Historically, they were the very people who had initially opposed Muhammad and the early Muslims most fiercely, only converting late in the process.
So you have wealth from the ongoing conquests in North Africa and the East pouring into Medina, millions of dirhams.
And there is a strong, growing feeling among the early converts, the Ansar, and the veteran provincial garrison troops in places like Kufa and Egypt, that the strict egalitarian principles established by Abu Bakr and Umar are dying.
Yeah, they feel the elite Quraysh, specifically the Umayyads, are monopolizing the wealth, the land, and the political power of the empire they bled to build.
This is a profound structural crisis. The stipend system, the diwan that Umar built, was struggling.
The influx of wealth caused inflation, and there was a massive number of new claimants demanding stipends.
So when Uthman's relatives and appointed governors were seen living lavishly, building massive estates, while provincial soldiers think their pay was being delayed or shortchanged, it bred deep, dangerous resentment.
That absolutely did.
We have to consider Uthman's logistical position, though. Put yourself in the shoes of an administrator managing an empire spanning from Libya to the borders of India in the 7th century.
Right.
Doesn't it make absolute logical sense to appoint the people you implicitly, personally trust to run the furthest provinces, namely your own family members? Or was this just a massive, tone-deaf miscalculation of the political climate?
Well, from a purely administrative standpoint of a traditional empire, it is a valid logic. You appoint loyalists. But in the highly specific context of early Islamic egalitarianism, it was a political disaster.
Ah.
The early Muslims firmly believed leadership and administrative posts should be based on piety, precedence in the faith, and early conversion, not bloodline or pre-Islamic aristocratic status.
So by elevating his clan, Uthman appeared to the veterans to be reverting to pre-Islamic tribal nepotism, dismantling the meritocracy Umar had tried to build.
Exactly, and this bubbling resentment finally boils over violently. Let us examine the siege of Uthman's house in Medina.
In 656, heavily armed rebels, primarily disenfranchised provincial soldiers from Egypt, Kufa, and Basra, converge on the capital city.
They present lists of grievances and demand Uthman dismiss his Umayyad governors and reform the stipend distribution.
But Uthman refuses to abdicate his position. He argues, based on religious conviction, that he cannot remove a garment, the caliphate, that God has placed upon him.
So the rebels, unable to force his hand politically, lay siege to his personal compound in Medina for 49 days. They cut off his water supply and isolate him from his supporters.
The standoff ends in absolute paradigm-shifting tragedy. On June 17, the rebels scale the walls of neighboring houses and break into the compound.
Yeah, they assassinate the 80-year-old Caliph Uthman in his own home while he is sitting and reading the Quran.
The sources specifically note that his blood spills directly onto the pages of the scripture.
The murder of the Caliph by fellow Muslims is a psychological earthquake for the entire society. It violently shatters the perceived sanctity of the capital city and completely destroys the political unity of the empire.
The blood spilled in Uthman's house pours out, metaphorically and literally, into a full-scale, devastating civil war.
Which brings us to the final phase of this era. The First Fitna, the reign of Ali, and the collapse of the unified system, spanning from 656 to 661.
In the immediate, chaotic aftermath of the assassination, Ali ibn Abi Talib is finally elected Caliph in Medina, but he is essentially handed a poisoned chalice.
Right, the state is already fracturing.
Ali's political position is practically untenable from day one. He faces immediate, loud demands from powerful factions across the empire to exact vengeance and punish Uthman's killers.
However, those very killers, the rebels from Egypt and Iraq, and their ideological supporters form a significant portion of the military coalition that just brought Ali to power in Medina.
He is trapped in a paradox. If he punishes the rebels, his own power base revolts and kills him.
Yeah.
If he does not punish them, the powerful Umayyad clan and other traditional elites declare him complicit in the murder of the caliph.
So Ali hesitates on the punishment, prioritizing the stabilization of the state infrastructure. He attempts to replace Uthman's governors to assert his authority, but this action just sparks open, armed rebellion against him.
Recognizing that Medina is no longer politically or militarily secure, Ali makes a highly consequential strategic decision. He moves the capital of the empire away from the Prophet's city, relocating it to the garrison city of Kufa in Iraq.
He does this to consolidate his power base among the Iraqi veterans and access the vast agricultural wealth of Mesopotamia to fund his armies.
The first major internal conflict is the Battle of the Camel, which takes place in December 656.
Right.
Ali's forces march out and clash with a massive rebel army led by Muhammad's widow, Aisha, alongside two highly prominent early companions of the Prophet, Talha and Zubair. They meet near the city of Basra in southern Iraq.
And the event is called the Battle of the Camel, because the fiercest, most desperate fighting centered entirely around the armored camel carrying Aisha's howdah.
It was a brutal, intimate slaughter among men who had fought alongside each other for decades.
It is the first time Muslim armies engaged in large-scale slaughter against other Muslim armies. An estimated 10,000 men died.
Ali emerges victorious. Talha and Zubair are killed on the battlefield, and Aisha is captured, respectfully escorted back to Medina, and effectively retired from public political life.
But defeating the rebellion in Basra does not solve the core issue, because the larger, more organized threat is in Syria.
Right. Umayyad, the powerful governor of Syria and Uthman's kinsman, absolutely refuses to pledge allegiance to Ali.
He commands a highly disciplined, well-paid Syrian army, and he demands that Uthman's killers be handed over before he recognizes Ali's authority.
This stalemate leads to the massive Battle of Siffin in July 657.
Ali marches his battle-hardened Iraqi forces north against Muawiyah's Syrian troops. The two massive armies meet on the banks of the Euphrates River in Syria.
It turns into a grueling, bloody stalemate that drags on for weeks. Despite heavy casualties, neither side can strike a decisive war-winning blow against the other.
Then, as the battle reaches a critical tipping point, the texts describe a truly bizarre and brilliant psychological tactic.
Yeah, Muawiyah's troops, acting on the advice of Amr ibn al-As, the same commander who conquered Egypt, take pages and parchment scrolls of the Quran and physically tie them to the tips of their spears, raising them high into the air across the front lines.
It is a profound visual statement. They are demanding that the military conflict be halted and decided by the arbitration God's word, rather than by the sword.
It is a highly calculated political move by Amr ibn al-As, designed specifically to fracture the religious sensibilities of Ali's army.
And the tactic works perfectly. The highly pious, veteran soldiers in Ali's camp see the scripture on the spears and refuse to attack.
They physically force Ali, against his own strategic judgment and warnings, to halt the fighting and agree to a formal human arbitration to settle the dispute.
The arbitration takes place at a neutral location, Dumato Jandal, in January 658.
Ali is represented by Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, a man chosen by his troops, and Muawiyah is represented by the cunning Amr ibn al-As.
And the outcome of this diplomatic summit is a catastrophic political defeat for Ali.
The texts describe Amr outmaneuvering Abu Musa completely. The arbitrators effectively agree to declare both current claimants deposed to allow for a new election.
Right. But while Ali's representative publicly stepped down on his behalf, Amr immediately breaks the agreement and declares Muawiyah the sole legitimate ruler.
Ali's absolute authority is severely undermined. He goes from being the unquestioned caliph of the empire to just one of two warring regional warlords.
And this flawed compromise births a dangerous new, radical faction, the Kharijites.
Right.
These were zealots in Ali's own camp, who formally seceded from his army. Their philosophy was rigid and uncompromising. They argued that by agreeing to human arbitration at Dumat al-Jandal, Ali had committed a grave sin.
Their slogan was, "Judgment belongs to God alone," meaning the outcome of the civil war should have been decided by God granting victory on the battlefield at Siffin, not by diplomats negotiating in a tent.
Exactly. The Kharijites believed that both Ali and Muawiyah, by engaging in diplomacy over divine will, are now apostates who must be killed.
So Ali is forced to divert his military attention away from Muawiyah in Syria to fight his own former supporters in Iraq.
He corners and crushes the main Kharijite army at the Battle of Nahrawan in July 658.
The slaughter is absolute, but he cannot kill the underlying ideology. It survives, goes underground, and morphs into a highly violent, decentralized insurgency.
Which brings us to the fatal conclusion of the era. On January 28th, 661, during the holy month of Ramadan, a Kharijite assassin named Abd al-Rahman ibn Muljam enacts their vengeance.
He strikes Ali with a poisoned sword as the caliph leads dawn prayers in the great mosque at Kufa. Ali dies of his wounds 2 days later.
It is a devastating end.
Let us analyze the sheer magnitude of this tragedy. The entire First Fitna feels like a massive pressure cooker finally exploded.
Yeah.
The rapid territorial expansion we detailed, the unimaginable influx of wealth, the millions of new diverse subjects, the massive influx of slaves, resources, and complex administrative problems, it simply outpaced the societal and political infrastructure's ability to absorb it.
The ancient Arabian tribal systems of consensus and personal loyalty simply could not handle the brutal realities of imperial administration, leading to inevitable violent fracture.
That is an accurate assessment of the structural failure. The assassination of Ali in 61 marks the definitive violent end of the Rashidun era.
Yes, the grand experiment of a consultative caliphate, led by the close early companions of the Prophet, based in Medina, collapses under the weight of his own rapid success.
Muawiyah capitalizes on the power vacuum created by Ali's death. He leverages his intact Syrian army to force the submission of the remaining factions and officially establishes the Umayyad dynasty.
And the geopolitical center of gravity shifts permanently. The capital is moved away from the Arabian Peninsula to Damascus in Syria.
The political structure transitions from the elective, consultative model of the early companions to a standard hereditary kingship, forever altering the nature and trajectory of Islamic governance.
Right.
So, what does this entire frantic 29-year timeline mean for the broader scope of history?
Well, we started in 632 with the death of a charismatic founder in a minor oasis town, leaving a community on the brink of total tribal disintegration.
In just 3 decades, through the consecutive reigns of Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali, this community survived civil war, unified, and birthed a military and bureaucratic machine that completely dismantled the 400-year-old Sasanian Persian Empire.
They permanently have the massive Roman Byzantine Empire.
And most importantly, they established the foundational administrative, linguistic, and fiscal systems that would govern the Middle East for centuries to come.
It is a scale of political, military, and territorial transformation that has very few, if any, parallels in recorded human history, especially considering the lack of starting infrastructure.
But we must leave you listening with a final, broader thought to ponder regarding the texts we've examined. While the historical sources, and indeed much of our discussion today, focus heavily on the explosive, dramatic military conquests of Khalid ibn al-Walid, the battles of Yarmouk and Qadisiyah, and the tragic assassinations of the caliphs, consider their most enduring legacy. It wasn't actually forged on the battlefield.
It was forged in the ledgers.
Exactly. Look at the specific, mundane administrative choices made primarily by Umar.
We are talking about the pragmatic preservation of local Greek and Persian languages, in the government tax offices, the retention of the existing Byzantine and Sasanian bureaucrats to run the farms, and the physical separation of the conquering Arab armies into isolated garrison cities like Kufa and Basra.
These decisions were made purely for short-term logistical survival, simply to keep the tax revenue flowing into Medina.
But in doing so, they inadvertently laid the invisible structural groundwork for the gradual, centuries-long cultural and linguistic Arabization of the entire Middle East and North Africa.
By explicitly not forcing immediate religious or cultural assimilation on their new subjects, they created a stable economic and social framework that made assimilation the most socially and economically advantageous choice for the local populations over generations.
They achieved through bureaucratic pragmatism what forced conversions or cultural erasure never could have accomplished.
Thank you for listening. History Maps. Learn history visually.